Hello and welcome to Rovertime Podcast number 26. Today we'll be speaking in NPR-like tones. Would you all please introduce yourselves?
Yes, my name is Stan Konopka. Thank you for joining us today. Please remember, we're having a membership drive here shortly. If you like this content, please be sure and be generous with your donations.
And next, the guy from Canada. Apparently he died. There he is.
He's being extra NPR and not speaking. He's speaking so low you can't hear him at all.
I don't look forward to the re-recording of that. No one's going to be able to hear it.
I couldn't hear you at all. So
I couldn't hear you at all. Exactly. And then there's probably someone who won't be NPR-ish. There's Crow.
Konnichiwa.
See?
Renegade for life.
Grove Street for life. All right, now anyone who gets that is a friend of mine. Now, I think we should discuss all of the very exciting news this week. We have a lot of it, and one of those things is
terrorism. Oh,
yeah. I mean, there's that. Kevin Spacey's a pedophile.
He's gay, so it's okay.
Kevin Spacey's gay. He's gay and he was drunk. And he's a Hollywood actor, so that immediately absolves him from any responsibility.
That's true. I have heard that before.
Stunning and brave.
All right, so let's dive right in. Duffer, would you like to speak about Lauren Southern's podcast or stream or whatever it was?
Yeah, it's interesting with our time slot because we sit between some pretty interesting characters. And today, just before we started filming, Lauren Southern had a live cast with, I think, 7 other guests. Yeah. And it was basically an example of how things can go really wrong when you don't have a proper moderator. And perhaps an example of some YouTube diva behavior. So, yeah, I don't know how I feel about that representing sort of the right-wing spectrum of YouTubers. What were your guys' opinions?
I made it about 3 minutes through that, and there was so much just talking over each other, I couldn't, I literally made it 3 minutes and I had to shut it off. I could not watch it. It was just ridiculous. I mean, a couple of ridiculous accusations were made in my opinion, just to kind of, for shock value. But, based on, like you said, when there's 7 people there, and it's not 7 people who, and from what I probably gather is Roaming was probably just in the background because she's, not that kind of a forceful personality, but the rest of them seem to be, and would just yammer over each other. So I think if anything you take away from that is a good moderator, but you also need to set a limit on how many people you have on a podcast, because that was just.
So Stan,
like I said, I get 3 minutes and it was a good show when I saw it.
Let me get this straight, Stan. So you are not a fan of the Republican debate format with 17 candidates on stage?
No.
Oh my God.
Well, in the Republican debate format, that's actually fine because most of the time they speak one at a time. There's not, it's if that was it, it's like, okay, you speak, but that's not what it was. It was just an open. If you had that debate format and they could all just a question thrown out there, they could all just talk at once, and who could talk over each other. Then yeah, I would have a problem with it.
Yeah, the thing is, which was sad as well, is they touched on some interesting topics, which I actually wish some of the YouTubers would actually talk to each other about. One of the ones was is Theron Meyer got thrown into sort of a debate with Lauren over some pretty touchy issues, which I've been surprised that we haven't heard them talk about more prior to it. The sad thing about how it was approached tonight, it literally looks like there were a lot of hurt feelings, and that's not great. YouTube gives us the opportunity for long form content and actual discussion, and this was sort of the opposite of that.
Which one's Theron Meyer? I don't know who that is.
Theron Meyer is a
Oh.
trans advocate
Oh, is
based
it
out of Vancouver
ContraPoints?
here.
Is that ContraPoints?
No,
Yeah,
ContraPoints is
tranny.
also a trans advocate. But sorry, Crow, I think I've cut you off. What were you going to say?
I said, he's also a tranny too. Yeah.
Was Theron Meyer the one that had just like the blue icon?
Yeah, she had her hair up. So she was the brunette. ContraPoints was the blonde.
So she was okay. So she was visible. There was one person literally that just had like the blue icon for YouTube that you get when you don't put up any kind of a photo.
That was Destiny.
Destiny. Okay.
That was the Destiny guy. Yeah.
What about her child?
Oh, just because Wazz is not here, we do not need the dad joke fill-in quota. So thank you for that. I think we're good for those. Somewhere Mark he's giggling with you for that joke.
Yeah, I just sort of a last sort of thing on this, unless you guys have some other things to say. What I dislike about it is that Lauren often creates situations where she actually shuts down discussion indirectly, and I think it's because she's trying to recapture the spirit of the freedom of the tweets thing, which Milo did, where he literally had, I think, 36 YouTubers on over the course of 6 hours. But even that was a massive gong show. And so it's like, should we put an advisory thing up? It's like, if you wish to be a YouTuber, please have no more than 5 guests at any one time and make sure one of them's a moderator.
Yeah, it was just, I mean, as you know, and especially when you had some strong personalities on there as well. I mean, to be on YouTube, you got to have a certain, amount of a strength of a personality. But, like you said, like Lauren, who is not afraid to put herself in the center of a storm, and it seemed like there were, and I'm not sure who the alt-right guy in the sweater was, but he seemed to be, from what I saw, enjoying poking a little bit to try and get everyone else to, or at least some of the others to trigger, which, I mean, that's, what some people do. So
we're getting some commentary from the Discord. Apparently this was good family viewing, or at least entertaining family viewing, from a lot of people's perspective. But I kind of have to wonder if we're going to see some more sort of fracturing within the so-called right side of the skeptosphere. I know a lot of YouTubers have been saying that they're like, why are we called the skeptics community when even our skepticism doesn't really bind us?
Well, it's kind of what's happened. We see it happening on with the SJW crowd. When they run out of people to attack on the other side, people start to, attack themselves, within their own community. I guess for the most part that, some of the tubers I mostly, appreciate, they try and stay out of that shit. And it's because it does. They, it seems like a lot of them, we enjoyed when like when Lacey came over and how people turned on, that and how some of them read themselves, but it's happening on this side too. So, when you're used to just attacking everybody and you run out of people to attack, well, you're going to start attacking. It's like, well, that wasn't too bad before, but now I have nothing else to do. So now I'm going to pick on that.
The cynic in me would say this will generate a lot of good response videos at some level, and that's the darker side of sort of the YouTube phenomenon and the e-popularity. Is even here, bad press is still press, and you can work with it.
Yeah, it's true.
But Crow or Phil, have you guys got any topics you want to bring up?
Well, terrorism would be a good start.
Go for it.
Well, terrorism is not very likely to kill you, folks. Stop being afraid. It's just an excuse for the government to give itself more power. Okay, more Americans have been struck by lightning in the last 50 years and who died from terror attacks, so chill the fuck out. Take a deep breath, calm down, and just chill.
So how many people have been killed by lightning strike?
Struck by lightning.
Or struck, struck by lightning.
Yeah, in 2010.
Okay, struck. All right.
In 2010, 29 people were killed by lightning strike, and 4 were killed in terror attacks. So in 2010.
Okay, I thought you said killed. I'm sorry. Struck. Okay, yeah, that I would buy, but I'm like over 3,000 people have been killed in lightning strikes. Like that seems. I mean, in the United States, I understand that caveat. Struck. Okay. Because we all know there's a few people that have been struck multiple times. It seems like they're lightning, personal lightning rods.
Yeah.
But continue. But the only thing I would say to that is it's not like the lightning is intending to attack you much as I mean, I understand your point, but that's I think where people would say, yeah, but terrorism is actively going to kill me, whereas lightning.
But does it justify spending $75 billion on intelligence operations, domestic counterterrorism, and all sorts of other shit every single year? Does it justify the government spying on people and touching your balls into airport? And does it justify that? I mean, come on.
I mean, the problem with that figure is I imagine lightning strikes are fairly normal over the course of time, whereas terror attacks have been occurring alarmingly more often. And we know why, but we haven't been addressing it properly.
No, motivations are unknown. Sorry, don't know why. We have no idea.
Well, I think the thing, and we've talked about it before, is just the saturation of coverage which comes out of that. And I'm not one for media censorship in that it's like, oh, we can't talk about bad things, but they like to lead with it so much that you feel like you're continuously being barraged by it. Like I know last week I made the mistake of literally watching too much news and staying up too late watching news. And it did affect my mental state. And it's like, man, if I can realize that just watching a little bit too much news a little bit too late at night is affecting my mental state, what does it do for people who are even more glued to their screens than me?
Well, I've and that's a good point, because I'll tell you, there's many times I'm like, I don't even want to look at social media. I don't want to look at anything because I'm, I'm not as into it as many are, and it wears me out, and it's like, I can't, I get to the point where I can't hear about this anymore. I mean, I know it's reality, but to Crow's point, I mean, does that mean that I drive through town expecting, a truck of peace? No. I also don't drive through town or walk, while I'm walking the dog, expect to be hit by lightning, so I don't, live my life, expecting it, because you can't, but I also think, spending that kind of, I don't know, that kind of money, it just seems, it's like, well, we all know that politicians will use anything to find a way to spend more money. I mean, that's what their jobs are for.
My issue with kind of criticizing the government on this topic is it's one of the few things they should be doing is helping protect us from terror, whereas doing so much other stuff that's costing more money.
I agree with that. That's costing more money, but still, I just don't think that the government's justified in its efforts.
Yeah, in this case, I just kind of think it's a pick your battle type thing, and I'm just going to leave this one alone for now. I'll pick it back up after we address, freaking crap like Social Security and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, it's also just one of those ones, like, I at this point, I should probably be getting a check from Steven Pinker for propping his book so much. But when we look at the statistics of how many people are dying due to freak incident, things like that, war, famine, it's going down, and in a very radical way. And in this way, the news is essentially fighting against its own irrelevancy. It has to focus on these stories, because otherwise it would just be like, things are actually really good. Sure, there was a terrorist attack today, but in a species that has over 6 billion people, that is not even a percentage point. Carry on.
Yeah.
As far as I'm concerned, though, reinforced cockpit doors on planes have done far more to stop terrorism than any government program, which proves my point that government sucks at basically everything and the private sector kicks ass. There we go.
Well, wasn't the reinforced door a government mandate?
Who invented it?
That doesn't matter who invented it. It was a government mandated installation on every plane flying commercially. So
yeah, the public demanded it. The market would have accommodated for obvious reasons, given that 9/11 just happened.
I don't know. I don't know the market would have
not saying you're wrong.
Accommodated, because I think they'll do what they can to, you know. I mean, we all know that at the end of the day, a lot of these companies, I mean, if they can avoid spending money they're not required to, they will do it unless they are mandated to do so. No matter what the good of the, you know, I mean, you look, you know, I mean, and again, I don't know what dollars we're talking about, but I mean, think about for how long, you know, with pollution and asbestos and all that other stuff, that because it was cheaper, companies just went with it until they were mandated to do otherwise.
What are you talking about? We still use asbestos. It's still very commonly used.
Well, not nearly as common as it used to be.
Well, no, it's the number one best and most commonly used insulator. The thing is that, you know, the Europeans went with the route of ban it, but the United States just realized that if you just wind the fibers tight enough, then eventually that it just stays in place and it's perfectly harmless. So we still use asbestos.
Right, but you understand that, you know, you understand the point I'm making, is that if it wasn't, you know, I'm sure it costs more money to wind it tighter so it doesn't do that. So if they weren't mandated to do so, do you really believe they would have done so?
Yes, actually, because
I don't know.
It doesn't cost very much, and you can advertise your asbestos to companies as safer, and then they can advertise it as safer, and consumers like that. It's the same reason why people buy more fuel-efficient cars, and it reduces air pollution as a result, because they want to save money on gas.
Well, I wouldn't use efficient cars as a very good example of free market. Everything about the oil and auto industry is so.
I understand your point, but you also know that if a company, you know, will determine that not doing something in the long run, whether it's right or not, if they can avoid, if they were given the option to not do it, would, you know, if they could use, you know, if they could use a cheaper grade of something, because in the long run it's like, well, these are the mass, you know, sales perspective or lawsuits, but it would be cheaper than to change that. I think most companies would do whichever was the more cost efficient way.
Well, the other thing is, so if we talk about, so this is an interesting aside from terrorism, but looking at products which have caused problems in the past but actually still exist with us today under different names is fascinating in and of itself. A really good example of this is thalidomide, which was used as an inoculation for polio and I think 2 other things as well. But the problem was when they created it, they realized it was an inoculation against polio, but they didn't realize that they were making 2 halves of a strain. And if you put those 2 halves together and they pair up, it'll actually bind with your DNA in a really weird way, which prevents the growth of your limbs. However, years after many of the cases and things like that, the chemical compound that is thalidomide, they figured out how to cleave it so that you no longer get the doubled up pairing. And they use it under a different name for all sorts of vaccines and whatnot. Now, it's once you get a name recognition, it's really hard to revitalize a brand. It's kind of funny that people with things like the slut walk are trying to do exactly the thing which many corporations have realized you can't do.
Slut walk.
The slut walk is stupid.
And actually,
for precisely the same reason, though, because it's hard to reclaim something once it has enough political and public opinion backlash against it. And so that's an interesting example because it never had a positive connotation. Whereas with thalidomide, they're actually trying to sell it as a good thing because they could see that it worked. They just didn't realize what it would do to people who were pregnant and to their kids.
there's actually a great Jewish story that goes along with what you're talking about here. The story goes like this: there was a man who left his synagogue and decided to speak ill of the rabbi, and insulted him in various ways and in a public setting. Years later, he comes back and he asks forgiveness of the rabbi, and says, I'm sorry, I didn't know what I was talking about. Is there anything I can do to earn your forgiveness? And he says, well, why don't you bring me a pillow? Confused, the man goes and retrieves a pillow for him. The rabbi then cuts open the pillow and throws all the feathers outside into the wind, and then tells the man, all right, now fetch for me every one of the feathers. He's like, but that's impossible. He said, and this is what you do when you damage someone's reputation.
Ah, that is a very fitting parable.
So
interesting.
The idea is, obviously, it's really hard to take back, or really hard to reclaim a bad reputation.
Yeah, and that's why ad hominem is such an efficient way of trying to take apart your opponent, especially if they resort to trying to actually deal with your attacks and trying to counter them. This is actually an interesting segue into, so Ethan Klein, H3H3 Productions, actually had Jordan Peterson on this week. And one of the things I hit him up with at the very beginning was, are you a racist? Like, just straight up. And I don't think he was trying to trap Peterson with this question, but he's like, what would you say to the people who are making this claim? And Jordan Peterson took a really interesting take on it, which was essentially this. It's like, well, if over 600 hours of YouTube videos provide no evidence for that claim, why should I have to defend the claim? And this sort of reminds me of not Sam Harris, but who was the British fellow who passed away? One of the Four Horsemen. But he said something which is claimed without evidence can be dismissed without evidence as well.
Right.
Yeah.
It's that's the biggest problem with trying to deal with the left, is they are since they don't have any logical arguments, they pretty much always resort to ad hominem. And
well, in particular, when I've seen where people have asked them, well, what about me, or what makes me this? Well, if you don't know, I can't help you. Okay, so you're saying, or if you defend if you say, well, no, this is why I don't have that. Well, of course you'd say that. So my defending myself against your accusation is confirmation of your accusation in your mind. Okay. So in other words, you could just call me whatever. You could call me a water buffalo. Oh, sorry. There's only one water buffalo. Shout out to Cenk Uygur.
Cenk Uygur, not the regular one, the good one.
Yeah. I mean, you could call me a Martian, and because I can't disprove. Oh, that's just confirmation of you are one. Okay. Okay, sure. I'm a Martian. Now what?
Quick interjection there. So the person who said what I said, that something which is brought up without evidence can be dismissed without evidence, it was Christopher Hitchens. And thanks to Roving Millennial for bringing that up.
I was just going to say that. No, I wasn't. I had no clue.
I'd like to dispute the claim because she's provided no evidence. So
absolutely.
Oh shit. So you can look it up on YouTube. He did say it all.
It's called Google. It's this wonderful.
Go look it up.
No,
Go look it up.
No, on YouTube you can see Christopher Hitchens saying it a lot.
Now, with that, it was also interesting with this podcast just to see Jordan actually talking to both Ethan and I think his wife's name is Elia Klein. But just to see what it was like to have Jordan sitting there talking to people who are very, very successful, but also have their own psychological ailments and ills, and just to see their reaction to someone who's sharing a methodology for taking control of your life and actually being active in taking that control, and it was quite amazing, because they were literally saying, like, we're actually really overwhelmed by what we do and by who we are, and how can we develop some skills to let ourselves feel good and actually feel good about our successes and producing stuff, and that will help us when we feel like we're not getting stuff done. And just to hear Jordan just like offering stuff to them, it was like, wow, this idea that you can take control of your life is so alien to so much of the popular discourse right now, and that's sad.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of one of the things I actually appreciate about Jordan is he doesn't. There's not a lot. He's got the old man where he's like, I'm not going to sugarcoat this shit. I'm gonna lay it out, and boy, does it set them off when he lays it out, because they do not. Well, to their, I guess, slight defense, they've never been forced to have any self-introspection or to think, whatever I think is not the way the world needs to cater to me. They've never been forced to do that. So it doesn't surprise me when they lash out at that type of feedback.
Yeah, I tell you what, that's kind of actually that's kind of a symptom of the whole leftist education again. It's because people don't do things happen to people. And that's a symptom of it, is not just that everything except the person is evil. It kind of goes even from our mundane things to, like, I don't control my life. Life just happens to me.
Yeah, and there's also this idea that we need government to do all sorts of shit, even though, I remember going to Bryant Park and just asking people, do you think we need government to run parks? And they kept saying yes, even though they were standing in a private fucking park. So we don't need government to do all sorts of things, and that's another product of the leftist education system.
Yeah, it was actually kind of funny. We've seen the, kind of off topic, but sort of on topic. You've seen a lot of the leftist message, being forced into a lot of entertainment, movies, TV show, video games. But I was recently playing a game here that had just had a recent new DLC, and in one of the crucial story points, and this is a Final Fantasy game, and it literally, at one point, there was a sit-down discussion between a leader and another leader from this smaller town. And he's like, you really want my opinion? Stop taxing the rich and make these refugees earn their own way. Don't give them everything. And I was like, holy shit. I'm like, did they just completely and that's where they ended up going. And the game ends up showing that this is successful. If you actually let people stand on their own 2 feet, if you kind of don't hand them everything, they'll actually succeed when they're forced to succeed.
It's too bad that's complete fantasy.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, well, it's fantasy as far as what the leftists and most of Did Crow just walk into traffic?
Well, I think traffic walked into one of us. But with that, I think the thing which we have such a problem trying to fight back against is what people will throw in our faces. But how come that can't fix things tomorrow? And like Jordan Peterson was saying, he goes, the thing is, it's incremental. You set realistic goals by thinking about what you want to do, and you go for the small gains. And, 2 years from now, you can look back and be like, holy smokes, I've come far. But so many people use the idea that you can't change things overnight as the counter argument to any sort of attempt to gain worth, to gain skills, to change the way you think, to learn a new way of doing things. And if you try and do that, and sorry, let me divert from there. The problem is then it's a shame culture, because it's like they will literally say, if you're trying to build towards something, you don't get it. We already have a ready-made answer. Here it is. If you don't agree with us, you're therefore, a bigot, a racist, a this, a that, or the other thing. And this is where, when somebody can actually articulate their position, even if they don't have all the answers, the argument of the far left starts to fall apart, because if they can't resort to anger and to bullying, then they can't resort to anything at all.
No, I mean, you've actually heard in some talks where people on the left have said, facts are racist. It's like, well, no, facts are numbers. And that's that's what they're going to. Everything is, well, you're what I feel like you're saying, what I want to say is, like, I am logically and rationally countering your assertion with facts, reality, and then you're going to chant, racists go home, racists go home. And it's like, that's wait, what? Do you have some counterpoints to offer, or just going to be, no, it's just going to be buzzwords and it's preaching?
See, when an argument makes you feel bad, it's a lot easier just to dismiss it out of hand.
Well, I mean, but how what you want to say is, like, having your worldview challenged, and what you know is, for example, realizing how much you don't know, and how much, okay, you were told this by somebody. I'm showing you that what they told you was false. This is how you grow and learn. But no, they choose to put on the cone of silence, and nope, I like what they said better, and I don't want that challenged.
Well, it's also kind of running amok of a very legitimate defense to make, which is that when you're talking about orders of magnitude, so how big something is and how much of an effect it can bring about, you have to change what you're dealing with as your base principles. But at the same point, to claim, like they often do, that you just don't understand because you're not smart enough or you're not with it enough, isn't actually laying the groundwork for that argument. And this is where I love Stefan Molyneux and his whole thing, where he's like, you have to break things down to base principles, because sometimes what the person is saying is not actually what they're arguing, and sometimes they don't know that.
I don't know, Steph Molyneux sometimes I don't like.
Oh
him.
yeah, he has his own internal issues.
I am fine, because I interact with plenty of very smart people. Yourself, well, Terry, I'm not gonna. Roaming, Matt, Blonde, but you can be smart and talk to me, not talk at me. And Stefan always comes across as, I am the smartest person here, and he just comes across very condescending. That's just my opinion. And yeah, he has a good message, but it just, to me, he comes across very, that's just me.
Yeah, what I'd say to that, the problem with Stefan and in some degree Jordan Peterson, is that most of their things can be reduced down to one specific point. And Jordan is a lot better at being humble about when people call him out on it. Stefan becomes very attack orientated, where you go, the problem with reducing everything to philosophy is that philosophy itself is a complex discipline. So you can't say that everything can be reduced to one type of philosophy, which is what Stefan does. So he does reduction to absurdity all the time, and then gets mad at people for saying, but wait, if I were to argue it from another philosophical position, that is not the answer which I would get every time.
Right. And I mean, that's almost makes him a little SJW-ish in that you're challenging him and he doesn't really like it and kind of fires back. So, I mean, I'm not calling him that, I'm not saying he is but I know plenty of people like him, but that's just, generally my opinion of him. Sam Harris to me comes out the same way too, a little bit. I'm the smartest person in the room and I know it, and don't you dare even think that you're on my level. Okay, I won't.
Oh, for sure.
So I know I'm not.
Now, Crow or Phil, are there any other topics that you would like to dive into?
Well, we can talk about Trump's trip abroad.
We could do that.
Yeah, as a list. That's a list on the list right here. Yeah.
All right,
Do we
Crow.
really have anything? Yeah, I mean, do we? I mean, he's in Japan. Has anything really?
I believe he played golf
maybe
with
I don't know.
Prime Minister Abe. And
How interesting.
then he had a speech, and the speech was good. And sounds like us and Japan are getting along famously.
Yeah, that's not so surprising.
We'll see how we get along with South Korea, considering Moon is much more left of center than Park was. But he's been kind of going more our way ever since he realized that North Korea doesn't really take talking seriously. He's like, yeah, we don't need to roll out these missile defense programs. North Korea will just talk to us and we'll have peace. And then he realized, yeah, it's not really going to happen. So
Yeah.
rolled out the missile defense things.
Yeah, be like Israel. North Korea is fucking retarded.
Speaking of North Korea being retarded, how about them collapsing their nuclear test site?
Yeah, that's North Korean engineering. Beautiful.
No, I didn't hear about this. What happened?
Well, one of their underground testing facilities caved in and killed a few workers. Don't know if it was a major facility or if it was something they did on purpose. Obviously, their government is rather opaque on any subjects similar to that.
I actually have a hypothesis on that, based off of the Manhattan Project. So turns out the way you mix cement, you need to mix it with radiation in mind. And also in places where metal is actually kind of scarce, they will try and cheat and not use rebar in the construction of what you're doing. And so with cements that actually have really high contents of, I think it's limestone, the radiation can actually eat away at it and make it brittle. And with the Manhattan Project, when they went back in later to the original labs which they had constructed, a lot of the times you could literally push your hand into the wall and it would fracture. And they sort of hypothesized that what it was the irradiation and not actually having enough materials in there to dampen down what was happening at a molecular level to make it stable. So it would be really ironic if they ran into the Manhattan Project problem just because they don't have enough metal reserves to build large-scale facilities underground.
That's plausible. I can see it. Yeah, I know. North Korea is very, I believe, if I remember right, they're pretty rare earth rich, but not much as far as regular resources are concerned. Is that correct?
China, North Korea, and apparently some regions in Russia there. Yeah, because there was that huge thing 2 years ago about China trying to open up a very rare earth rich area. But North Korea, I think, is also one that's sitting on there. And apparently Afghanistan, too, has a very large untapped rare earth potential.
Well, hopefully they continue to be on our side for a while.
We need it for our cell phones.
Frickin' Musk would like it for his stupid cars that...
His cars are fucking
get started on cars.
Yeah, Musk's cars are stupid.
Yep, Tesla lost more this quarter than they ever have before. It's not surprising to me because, you know, I actually think through these things, but given that most of his investors don't, that makes sense. Why? No, it doesn't. I have no idea why people keep investing in that company.
Well, actually, Phil, do you want to unpack that a bit? So what did you see prior to this decline that made you so skeptical about what was going on?
Well, considering he's never turned a profit once, except for one quarter, what was it, 3 quarters ago, where his entire profit was from selling carbon credits, because despite him ostensibly being a company that would never emit anything, they still get carbon credits because government, am I right? So he sells those to all the other companies. And then that's how he makes his money. Meanwhile, people invest all their money, pre-order the Model 3 and stuff, and then spends all that on further development, misses every production target ever set. But yet the stock price keeps rising to the point where their market cap is higher than GM. I don't get it.
Lots of subsidies.
It's an emotionally driven stock, and I hate it.
Yeah, so go ahead, Crow.
Yeah, basically, he has a lot of subsidies. And people like to be green, even though it's not really green, because the car batteries are very bad for the environment, it seems. So basically, Elon Musk is kind of a dick.
Yeah,
Tesla is just... I also have a special hatred for them because I'm an American muscle type person, so big, obnoxious engines are my style. And Tesla represents everything that is the opposite of that. It's about creating an electrical appliance versus, versus the actual driving experience. But if some people wish to buy them, then by all means. It's just, I hate when products are pushed on me when they don't sell on their own merits, which actually brings me to another related point. I think pretty much the only thing I'm disappointed in Trump with so far is him caving to frickin' my senators, Iowa, about the renewable fuel standard and ethanol. Because now the EPA and him, they've announced that they're not going to touch the renewable fuel standard, which dictates X amount of ethanol needs to be produced each year. And I hate the stuff because it ruins engines.
Yeah, it's funny with that. But
unfortunately, it makes up 40% of my state's agriculture or corn. That's where 40% of the corn goes. So I see why they didn't touch it, just because they didn't want to upset everything like that. But I still think it's really stupid when it's like we produce so much corn we're wasting on stupid garbage fuel. Meanwhile, we're importing corn to eat from Brazil. It's like, what? I just don't get it. And
Brazil is exporting corn, despite the fact that they have shortages because they use a lot of ethanol for their fuel too. The funny thing with that is, so it's a filler product. that is largely, as far as I can tell, a result of scarcity, which was happening in the 1960s and 1970s, or at least fear of scarcity. So they doubled down on a product which they could use as a filler, which didn't produce a lot in the way of hydrocarbons or in terms of particulate matter. And we just haven't been able to get rid of it since, even though fuel-efficient cars shouldn't actually need it to extend the life of their fuel.
So the benefit to ethanol alcohol is that it's a very high octane and burns very readily, but it doesn't have much energy. So it's a filler product, like you're saying, but it's much less energy than oil, energy dense. And it actually takes more energy to produce it than it actually produces itself when burned. So it's really just a big self-defeating cycle that we've engaged in with ethanol.
So what you're saying is it's the celery diet for cars.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, it's very
but luckily, and I can only assume this is God smiling on me, but luckily there are a few gas stations around here that do offer ethanol-free gas, so I exclusively buy that.
good.
I'm amazed, though, since considering we're the top corn-producing state.
People
I don't know how we've escaped requiring it in every gas point or every gas product like other states do, but I'm okay with it.
They actually require that? That's ridiculous.
Yeah, in some state, in a number of states, it's required in every fuel blend, except for very specialty products, airline fuel or race fuel.
That is retarded.
But for standard pump gas, it's required.
Why are people pushing ethanol so much? It's so stupid.
It's not subsidized in the same manner as other things. Like, it doesn't just get a tax credit necessarily, but it's subsidized in the way that the government requires X amount be produced and blended into X amount of oil. And then there's the whole like credit system that goes along with that. Like, the refineries get a certain number of credits for blending fuels, but the problem is small and medium refineries can't handle it, so they kind of just get shut out of the market, and it's leading to consolidation in the refinery market, further increasing prices. Basically, ethanol is the worst thing ever, and I want it to go away.
Nice.
Good
Stan,
closing
do you have any
argument.
topics?
Well, I wanted to just quick bring up on a completely different subject. So, with the whole, with a lot of the sexual harassment stuff with Harvey Weinstein and all these other guys that came up, one of the channels that I used to watch was one called Screen Junkies. I don't know if anyone's heard of Honest Trailers.
It's very entertaining.
Yeah, they essentially created Honest Trailers, which is very funny. And one of their creators of this company, Andy Signor, was one of the guys right after Harvey Weinstein that kind of came out, or it was not came out, but it was, the flood of accusations. And a couple of things when that first came out that really kind of stuck in my craw was a lot of the guys that have been with him since he started immediately were all to the women, I believe you, essentially throwing him right under the bus, whatever. If, either A, you worked with him all this time and chose not to see, or you did see, but were enjoying the gravy train you were on and didn't care. But this past week, a couple of the people I still follow on Twitter, and I wanted to kind of see if any of them had commented on it since he was fired. And they had a round table with two of the other creators there, two other women, and a psychologist, whatever, counselor from from California on, and they were discussing. The discussion was, what is sexual harassment? And I'm listening to it, and it's kind of by the numbers what you would expect. But a couple of things that really stuck in my craw that I want to kind of vent about was, one of them was this psychologist was essentially saying, any interactions that men have with women, you need to be checking in with the woman to make sure that you haven't offended her. Or if you're going to say something, check in with her before you say it to say, hey, it's like, so by the way, I want to say you have a nice ass, but is that going to offend you? So, that was the first thing. I'm like, so any interaction I have with a woman, I need to be checking in with her every 30 seconds, be like, have I offended you? Have I offended you? Have I offended you? Have I offended you?
I don't, sometimes I think these people have never attended high school in their lives. Like,
I mean, but then it actually, for me, got more irritating, because then one of the guys was like, so a lot of people said, we're defending, saying, well, shouldn't we wait till proof comes out? Essentially like being all low T male and like, I should believe the woman. And this psychologist said, well, and I'm paraphrasing, but essentially, if a woman makes this accusation, we really should err on the side of believing her, because that would be the better of the two options. Because why would she make this up? And I'm like, are you freaking kidding me? Again, we talked about this earlier. Whatever the accusation is, granted with these, it's a bad example because we've seen a flood of proof, flood of accusations. But, look at Mattress Girl. Completely false accusation. Guy literally kicked out of college. His livelihood ruined over a false accusation. But this woman's thing was, well, I understand that, but we really should believe whenever the accusation is made. And I'm like, it just staggers me that is the default mindset is, well, I've made an it's guilty until proven innocent.
Yeah, people can be ridiculous.
And I found that just, and this is a counselor, who helps people get through stuff. And it's like, I want to say this one, like, so you haven't read about, I don't know, a guy who had a false accusation against him killing himself? Oh no, yeah, that happened. I actually have a friend who had a false accusation. He ended up in therapy because it kind of ruined his life for a little while, because people just blindly believed the woman. And it's just, and especially when, in these situations when they wait so long, and then it's just, I realize I'm kind of not making a lot of sense now, but it was just, when I was listening to that, I was just getting very rage-induced, because I am really tired of the guilty until proven innocent mindset, especially when it comes to this particular situation.
And that's why I really love Betsy DeVos for repealing that Dear Colleague letter, Title IX.
Yeah.
Even though some colleges have decided, no, we're gonna go with it anyway.
Well, yeah, I mean, especially, with that, when the accuser literally is not allowed to present a defense, or the accused, it's like, whatever the woman says, that's what we're going with. You're kicked out. You're done. Nope. I understand she's retracted it. Too bad. And it doesn't even have to be the person doing it. Yeah, I heard my friend say this. Oh, that's it. He's out. No.
It's preponderance of evidence standard. All the evidence we have shows that he did this, which is literally just hearsay, but that doesn't matter. That's all the evidence we have.
Exactly. Well, I mean, it's essentially like, when they talk about the evidence, it's kind of like a grand jury. It's like when you're only hearing one side, you're literally hearing, here's what I have, here's what I have, here's what I have, with no justification for, well, here's why this is. Here's my counter proof. She's showing you this bit, but here's the exact next thing that was said, which she's not showing you. And it's just, people wonder why I tell you, it makes me so hesitant to get out dating because it's like it makes what Mike Pence said about not having dinner with a woman without his wife there. It's not such a crazy thing to say.
You know what's funny about that too is just the I don't even know what's the word I'm looking for. It's like it's the double standard, I guess, where the first thing is they're insulting all the conservatives because we're not conscientious enough of women and etc. And then Mike Pence goes and does a very chivalrous thing like, never having dinner alone with another woman because he doesn't trust himself. And suddenly he's stupid and a horrible person because of that. It's like, so to quote Roaming in one of her recent videos, you realize you literally cannot be pleased.
Yeah.
This is one of those ones where there are too many people who benefit from keeping the concept of what's going on nebulous and without ties to reality that can be seen tangibly. Now, on the one hand, that makes sense because you're not always aware of everything that's going on around you, and you're not necessarily aware of how people are reacting to stimulus, right? And so when it comes down to sexual assault allegations or sexual misconduct, it becomes one of those things where it's like it's a he said, she said at the best of times unless you do get the evidence. So I've always had a hard time trying to figure this out because the idea that listen and believe has some merit, what I would say is it should be listen as a means to facilitate an investigation. The investigator themselves or the third body should never believe. That isn't what we actually want. What we want them is, okay, a problem has been raised. We actually need to engage with this seriously. I personally should not have a stake in it until I've done my research. But people don't necessarily want to hear that. And the sad thing as well is the people that are benefiting the most from this, and Blonde in the Belly of the Beast had a great video on this, is actually the people who fall into the male feminist category, who become the ultra allies, and therefore they get a little bit of a free card to engage in these behaviors because, oh shoot, if I speak out against this guy, then I'm hurting the cause as a whole. When really it should be, look, like Ben Shapiro says, you need to have a definitive office culture when it comes to this sort of thing, and it needs to be something that we think about. So if you go into an office where you notice that there is a lot of this stuff happening and they're not really interested in actually laying down some guidelines, then maybe you shouldn't work there. Or maybe that's when you start the discussion about what's going on, and then you find out what happens. Because with the organization you were talking about there, Stan, the real problem is that women were actually putting forward complaints, and human resources was essentially burying it. And that speaks to an organization that may have too much power invested in the wrong places, and therefore they're facilitating a predator. So it's complicated enough that I don't really have a definitive way of coming down on it. But the way it's being articulated prevents us from actually addressing the issue, because if we were to do that, we would remove the nebulousness which people can appeal to.
Yeah, and like I said, I mean, I understand that this particular thing, because of the flood of evidence, but I think then just to make the, to implant that as a, default mindset, it's dangerous, frankly, because no matter what feminists or SJWs want to say, women can, as well as men, everyone can be vindictive, and it, people will do. I mean, you look at, today's shooting. I mean, anything. People will do horrible things to each other out of spite and without any sort of a critical eye on some of these things. When you rush to believe, listen and believe no matter what, it's like, well, do I get to be listened to and believed? No? Okay. Well.
Yeah.
That was all I had.
Well,
Yeah, just watching that video kind of put me in a little bit of a, gave me a crick in the neck and a little bit of a rage headache.
Well, why don't we wrap up for the day with our closing statements? This has been Rovertime Podcast number 26. Thank you for joining us on NPR today. I've been Terry Suave, and I would just like to make it known that Elon Musk is the worst person in existence.
I would like to also remind everybody that we've got our November pledge drive coming up. We will, Mark Wazz will give you, for every $1 donated, he will give you 2 dad jokes. So please be generous if you would like more quality content, like the Mark Wazz CD of jokes that only he laughs at. But
I think they're
please be
funny.
generous.
And
damn it, Crow! Don't enable.
As a close there, guys, if you want to see
enable
some
Mark's jokes.
in-depth analysis of the unfortunate shooting which happened today in Texas, be sure to check out Beauty and the Beta, which will be happening, I think, in a half hour's time.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Okay, I guess that's Crow's closing thoughts. Okay.
Yeah. That's my closing
that's it.
thought. Yep.
Yep. And fuck government.
Yeah, fuck the government.
That's actually his. That's actually in his Twitter bio. Fuck the government.
I'll put it there. Actually, you know, why not?
I was gonna say, why not? I mean, you know, go with the statement that you go with the most.
Yep. Godspeed.
Thanks, guys.